attempt to do so. And, you know, we've always believed that there's a balanced approach that's essential when we talk about plant breeders and plant breeders' rights. And this bill simply does not get us here. And, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to continuing after question period.
The member will have 7 minutes to complete his speech after we resume debate. Statements by members. Déclaration de député.
Statements by members.
For Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this fall, I joined with the co-chair of the all-party Oceans Caucus, the honourable member for New Westminster Coquitlam, in hosting a breakfast where parliamentarians heard from a leading ocean scientist on the issue of ocean acidification. It's a phenomenon that's harming, for example, the shellfish industry in the Pacific Northwest, an industry providing an outstanding product, but also valuable jobs and business opportunities for rural coastal communities. Shellfish farmers are working hard to adapt their operations by incorporating water monitoring and treatment practices. It's innovative work to improve knowledge and ultimately help ensure the continued success of this industry for the future. I welcome all honourable members to join us today after 4:30 p.m. in 216 North as our Oceans Caucus joins with the World Wildlife Fund in presenting our third Oceans on the Hill event for this year on the topic of ocean acidification. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Manicouagan. Recently, the 27th Drug Awareness Week took place. The Centre d'Intervention Le Rond-Point in Sept-Îles took this opportunity to raise public awareness of drug abuse among the young from 10 to 24 years of age and to promote the services it provides, that is, support, assistance, and social reintegration for people suffering from addiction. Services are also available for loved ones, and prevention activities are held in workplaces and schools. I was able to see for myself the work they do in the field in order to broach the pernicious effect of industrial expansion on the social fabric of the North Shore. I also want to underscore the importance of the work these stakeholders do throughout the Manicouagan.
West.
New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant had a very simple message during this year's provincial election for anyone wanting to frack natural gas in New Brunswick. You're not welcome here. But just wait a minute. Now, just after 2 months in office, the Liberal Premier's clear message isn't so clear. Minister of Energy Donald Arseneau now says that he'll allow some fracking. Premier Gallant now says there are different types of moratoriums he'll consider. Mr. Speaker, this is unbelievable doublespeak. New Brunswick will succeed by allowing the development of its God-given natural resources. I stand in this House today to tell the Premier it is time to eat crow, admit you were wrong about fracking, and signal to the rest of the world that New Brunswick is open for business. My constituents want a better New Brunswick full of good, well-paying jobs and a strong economy. That industry can deliver that, so let's get on with it.
The honourable member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Mr. Speaker, on October 22nd, the day Michel Paquette retired, I was supposed to make this statement and to pay tribute to him, but because of what we all experienced that day, of course, the statement was delayed. I'd like to underscore Michel's achievements. He's a warm man who's always been concerned with doing his job right. After a 38-year career, 38 and a half years here in the House of Commons as a messenger, among other things. This is important work given the breakneck pace of our work that is often stressful. Regardless of the weather, Michel was always in a good mood and smiling and made him a real institution in his department. He was always a sympathetic character and was always pleasant to welcome when he delivered something to my office. He began his work in the House as a page in 1978. So, happy retirement, Michel, and thank you for your excellent service over the years.
Honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, as chair of the Canada-Cyprus Parliamentary Friendship Group, I've learned of a great escalation in Turkey's aggressive attitude toward the Republic of Cyprus. Turkey recently deployed a research vessel escorted by warships into the exclusive economic zone of the Republic of Cyprus, where the key resource projects are being explored by Cyprus with great potential for all Cypriots. This resulted in a suspension of the negotiations between Cyprus and Turkey. As agreed at the Commonwealth Heads meeting last year, Canada expresses full support for and solidarity with the Republic of Cyprus and its sovereign right under international law to explore resources in its exclusive economic zone. Canada calls for an end to provocations that threaten stability in the Eastern Mediterranean and for resumed negotiations toward a lasting solution that will bring stability to Cyprus and to the entire region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Deputy.
Honourable member for Laval. In my riding of Laval, despite ongoing follow-up of immigration cases for our constituents, we've had 5 cases of family separation by the Canada Border Services Agency. It's important to underline these cases that involve children who were born or grew up in Canada. Mrs. Florentino Morel, the mother of Letitia, who's 2.5 and born in Quebec, had to leave the country with her husband and daughter. The Munoz Gallegos family got an order to leave the country within 25 days. 25 days, Mr. Speaker, to liquidate their assets, cancel medical treatments, take their children out of school, and they have to leave the country where they thought they'd found refuge. Dramatic separations are imposed on young children and their parents, and unrealistic deadlines are imposed in addition to that. The values of humanity and justice are absent here, and even worse, the procedures of the Department of Immigration and the CBSA are incompatible and diametrically opposed to our values. Where is the mistake here? How are we respecting the rights of Canadian children?
Yeah.
On November 17th, the people of BC went to the polls to elect municipal mayors and councillors, as well as regional directors for the next 4 years.
In my riding of Kootenay, Columbia, that includes 14 municipalities and 3 regional districts. They are tasked with everything from water and sewer to snow removal, road maintenance to recreational facilities. They are the frontline politician. They cannot walk through their local grocery store without being told how to do things better.
I would like to wish each and every elected municipal and regional politician in my riding of Kootenay, Columbia, the best of luck, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come.
The honourable member for Edmonton East.
Mr. Speaker, today we remember the Holodomor, a crime against humanity the world in the past knew little of, hidden behind the Soviet curtain of iron. More than 7 million perished in Ukraine 80 years ago in a forced famine of unimaginable horror. The deep, rich soil of Ukraine, known as the breadbasket of Europe, suffered not the ravages of nature, but suffered the savagery of one man, Stalin. While millions of Ukrainians horribly starved to death, the people of the world feasted on Ukraine's bountiful crops stolen by Stalin's evil regime. We must speak out to support historical truth of mankind's failings in Canada and around the world, or revisionist historians, deniers of the Holodomor, will educate the world with their version of the truth. Today we remember the victims of the Holodomor, the dark side of humanity, and by remembering we help the world guard against those who would repeat such genocide.
Honourable member for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, it's with great enthusiasm that I rise today in the House to give my unreserved support to the candidacy of Quebec City to welcome the largest World Congress of Junior Chambers of Commerce in 2016, the famous JCI World Congress 2016. This will be an enormous congress of young business people with 3,500 delegates of over 100 countries with economic spin-offs of over $15 million. That would be a fantastic showcase for Quebec City and for Canada, as well as for our tourism industry and young entrepreneurs. I'd like to congratulate Jean-Simon Deschênes, François Bégin, Pierre-Yves Dubois, Louis-Philippe Sutton, Patrick Roberge, Alexandre Mecca, Geneviève Doyle, and many other volunteers and sponsors. The Femme Alpha group that seeks to promote women's leadership, and of which I'm a member, also supported Quebec City's candidacy. I salute the Junior Chambers of Commerce. I have my puck here, too.
Honourable member for Selkirk Interlake.
Mr. Speaker, Friday marked the one-year anniversary of the start of the Euromaidan protests, a popular grassroots rejection of former Ukrainian President Yanukovych and his refusal to sign the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. Thousands of people gathered in Kiev's Independence Square on Friday to commemorate and honor those who died protecting the rights of Ukrainian citizens. Absolutely. President Poroshenko also signed a decree recognizing the Heavens Hundreds as heroes of Ukraine. Russia's response to the last year's events has also been significant. Military occupation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, and an active role in destabilizing eastern Ukraine by supplying soldiers and heavy arms to the Kremlin proxy militias in Donetsk and Luhansk. Our government continues to stand with Ukraine in the face of its current challenges. Whether it takes 5 months or 50 years to liberate it, we will never, ever recognize the illegal Russian occupation of any Ukrainian territory. President Putin, Crimea is Ukraine, Luhansk is Ukraine, Donetsk is Ukraine, and our Prime Minister made it clear to Putin at the G20, you need to get out of Ukraine.
The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, my office has been inundated by petitions signed by many hundreds of my constituents in support of farmers' seed rights and against the economic strategies of many GMO corporations. These petitions were circulated by the good people at the Big Carrot Natural Food Market located in Toronto Danforth. The Big Carrot plays a key role mobilizing Torontonians to support family farms, promote food safety and food security, and arrest the deepening market domination of agribusiness megacorporations. The NDP is standing with these constituents in opposing the Conservatives' Omnibus Bill C-18. The NDP tabled 16 amendments, Mr. Speaker, to improve this bill. We sought to ensure that farmers' rights to save, reuse, exchange, and sell seeds were protected, to level the playing field between seed breeders and farmers, and to protect farmers from abusive litigation by GMO seed companies. However, every amendment was rejected by the governing Conservatives. It's time for the government, Mr. Speaker, to start listening to concerned Canadians and to all stakeholders.
The honourable member for Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough,
Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay tribute to one of Canada's hockey greats, Mr. Pat Quinn, who sadly passed away last night. Pat Quinn spent more than 4 decades in the NHL as a player, coach, and general manager. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, Pat the Big Irishman Quinn played parts of 9 NHL seasons as a defenseman with Toronto, Vancouver, and Atlanta. His true hockey greatness, however, shone brightest as an executive, and most notably behind the bench. Quinn won 2 Jack Adams Awards for NHL Coach of the Year with the Flyers in 1989 and the Canucks in 1992. But, Mr. Speaker, what I remember most is seeing him behind the bench when Canada won its first gold medal in 50 years at the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City. He also helped Canada bring home an under-18s gold medal, World Juniors gold, and even the World Cup gold in 2004. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to offer my condolences to his wife Sandra and the rest of his family, friends, and of course all those whose lives were impacted by him both on and off the ice. He will be missed.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, November is National Adoption Awareness Month. Sadly, there are 30,000 Canadian children and youth in foster care awaiting adoption. Canada is a signatory to the UN Convention on Rights of the Child, which states that all children have a right to a safe and permanent living situation. Despite the numbers and despite our international obligations, we've done little as a nation to raise that awareness. We need to do more. Consider that over 60% of runaways in Canada come from the fostering system. Of those who age out, over half of the girls turn to prostitution
and the boys to crime. Many of these vulnerable youth are taken or simply seduced by human traffickers or simply go missing. Mr. Speaker, this is personal to me because my son, Ian, is an adopted child. Recently, he graduated from Cornell, and he's now doing postdoctoral work at the University of Pittsburgh.
Hear, hear.
This House needs to do everything it can to encourage adoption and provide resources to ensure that Canada's children, like Ian, have a fair shot at life. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday our government was proud to announce $200 million in new and expanded mental health initiatives for veterans, serving military members, and their families. Thanks to this investment, a new major operational stress injury clinic will be established in Halifax, and additional satellite clinics will be opened in St. John's, Chicoutimi, Pembroke, Rockville, Kelowna, Victoria, and Montreal South. Mary Deacon, the chair of Bell's Let's Talk Mental Health Initiative, said, and I quote, "We commend the work being done by the Departments of National Defence and Veterans Affairs to support the men and women who face mental illness as a result of their service to the country, including this latest commitment of an additional $200 million. We're proud of our continued investment to improve the lives of soldiers and veterans and their families, Mr. Speaker. Facilities like the ones we're supporting will have frontline medical health professionals and experts to ensure that those who have earned and continue to serve, who have served and continue to serve our country in uniform, have the support they need and deserve. You can count on our Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, to always stand up for our veterans and our armed forces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Lambert. Mr. Speaker, 25 years ago today, Ed Broadbent, who was then leader of the NDP, tabled a motion seeking to make child poverty eradicated by 2000. This motion was adopted unanimously. Nearly 15 years after the failure of that objective, the situation continues to be worrisome. Even more so because the Prime Minister does not seem to find this important in the least. He even described this motion as being extremely stupid. He rather save money on the backs of veterans and First Nations by using up the money for them for other purposes. The Department of Veterans Affairs sent $1.1 billion back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Aboriginal Affairs sent back $712 million. This while the Prime Minister has a $768,000 trip to the far north at taxpayer expense. In 2015, the first NDP government will respect the 1989 resolution and put an end to child poverty.
The honourable member for Desnethe, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to stand in the House today and say that every single family with children under 18 in my riding of Desnethe, Mississippi, Churchill River will benefit from our government's new measures to assist Canadian families. Only our Conservative government understands that Canadian families know how to best spend their hard-earned money. Under our plan, every family with children will benefit from the enhanced universal child care benefit to a tune of almost $2,000 for every child under 6, and $720 per year for every child between 6 and 17. Likewise, the family tax cut will result in over $1,100 for the average Canadian family. What did the Liberals and NDP promise? Less money in your pocket and more money in the pocket of bureaucrats. The Liberal leader even said he could convince Canadians to accept the new tax hikes and promised to reverse our tax relief. Mr. Speaker, though the Liberals would make life more expensive for hardworking Canadians, our Conservative government delivers on our promises, and we are proud to be the only party that stands up for Canadian families.
Oral questions, questions orales. The honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, after Conservatives failed to deliver over $1 billion in promised funding to help veterans, and just before a potentially scathing new report from the Auditor General, the minister pops up and recycles an old announcement. Does the minister really think recycling old commitments is suddenly going to make up for years of neglecting our injured vets and soldiers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government consistently increased support for Canadian veterans.
That's right.
Yesterday, we continued that by increasing mental health support for those in the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, and their families. Our veterans' mental health is something our government takes very, very seriously, and we will continue to improve on those services, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the minister closes regional offices to save money, denies benefits to vets to save money, denies services to vets to save money, and yet there was hundreds of millions of dollars earmarked for veterans that was going unspent every year. Will the minister cut the excuses and explain how not spending that $1.1 billion makes our vets any healthier?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the assertion made in that question is absolutely false. All governments always ensure statutory funding is fully funded to ensure there is no shortfall. This is completely normal practice, Mr. Speaker. Veterans Affairs expenditures have increased from $2.7 billion when the Liberals were in government to $3.5 billion last year, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hull-Aylmer. For years, the Conservatives denied the urgency of taking action to provide mental health services to our servicemen and women and our veterans. But instead of providing services, they've shuttered offices and sought to save over $1 billion on the backs of veterans. It took a scathing report from the Auditor General and a public relations crisis for the government to decide to act. Does the minister really think that he can buy the silence of veterans for $200 million? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we announced new mental health support for Canadian Armed Forces personnel, veterans, and their families. We're investing in major new operational stress injury clinic in Halifax. We're also opening new satellite locations across the country while expanding the current facility in the Greater Toronto area. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed towards Canada's veterans, armed forces, and their families as we continue to work on their behalf, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Hull-Aylmer.
The Canadian government approved the sale of thalidomide as a safe drug for use in pregnancy. Many Canadian families suffered tragic consequences as a result of that decision. The remaining thalidomide survivors are now dealing with immense pain and suffering. For decades, they have struggled alone, but it should not have to be that way. Will the government do the right thing and support the NDP motion to provide immediate compensation to the survivors?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, this tragic event from the 60s reminds us how seriously we need to take drug safety. Nothing can ever undo the pain and suffering inflicted. Canada now has one of the safest drug systems in the world, recently strengthened even further with the passage of Vanessa's Law. Mr. Speaker, we're happy to review any policy proposals and add to conversations had earlier this year with Health Canada officials. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hull-Aylmer. Over 50 years after the tragedy, close to 100 Canadian victims of thalidomide are still waiting for compensation. At the time, the Canadian government delayed withdrawing the drug, and hundreds of Canadians died of it or became disabled. It is high time to correct this injustice. The question is as follows: yes or no? Will this government support the NDP motion and support the survivors of thalidomide? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, Health Canada has learned from this tragedy and made improvements that have reduced the risk of this kind of terrible event from occurring again, including an overhaul of Canada's drug regulatory framework. And again, I'll repeat, Mr. Speaker, we're happy to review any policy proposals and add to conversations had earlier this year with Health Canada officials. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie.
Mr. Speaker, despite the explanations of our soldiers regarding the shutdown of veterans' offices, the Conservatives preferred to spend $743 million on partisan propaganda. Despite 160 suicides over 10 years, the Conservatives preferred to take back $1.1 billion that were earmarked for veterans.
And today, on the eve of the report of the Auditor General, they are promising at the last minute $200 million to address mental health. Why should our veterans believe this government?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government has consistently increased support for Canadian veterans. Yesterday, we continued that by increasing mental health support for those in the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, and their families, Mr. Speaker. Our veterans' mental health is something our government takes very, very seriously, and we will continue to improve on those services, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Speaker, last week the Parliamentary Secretary admitted that Veterans Affairs sent $1.13 billion back to the Treasury instead of spending it on veterans. This weekend, the Minister contradicted his Parliamentary Secretary, saying the money is recycled into veterans programs, but all we ever see are self-serving TV ads. Now facing a mounting backlash, and on the eve of the Auditor General's report, the Conservatives announced inadequate funding for vets and their families, a fraction of the $1.13 billion. So can the Minister tell us now, of this $200 million announcement, how much do they plan to lapse?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the assertion made in that question is absolutely false, Mr. Speaker. All governments always ensure statutory funding is fully funded to ensure there is no shortfall. This is a completely normal practice. As a proof, in the last year of the Liberal government, Veterans Affairs lapsed $111 million, Mr. Speaker, $111 million in 1 year under a much, much smaller budget, Mr. Speaker. Simple fact, when Veterans Affairs expenditures have increased under our government, that party voted against it.
The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, do you know what they could have done with that $1 billion? They could have easily kept all of the 9 veterans' offices open. They could have hired enough caseworkers so that veterans don't have to wait to access services. In the face of 160 military suicides in the last decade, they could have hired more mental health professionals. They could have provided the funds to ensure dignified funerals for all veterans. Now it's too little, too late. Why do they make veterans beg for the services they need and they deserve?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's no secret Canadians still remember it was under the Liberal government that our men and women suffered a decade of darkness, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to standing up for Canada's veterans, men and women in uniform, our government has a strong record. Exactly why, Mr. Speaker, our government has spent over $30 billion since taking office. That's $5 billion in additional funding. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to stand up for Canada's veterans on this side of the House.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, as predicted by the NDP during the initial debate on the Iraq mission, the Minister of Justice indicated this weekend that the government is considering airstrikes in Syria. But that raises a number of problems, especially if we need to be associated with Bashar al-Assad and ask his permission. In fact, the Conservatives have also said that that we should not interpret these strikes as a strike against Syria. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister confirm that Canada is considering airstrikes in Syria? Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Canada is focused on the current mission that the Canadian men and women in uniform are conducting, and that includes airstrikes against ISIL in Iraq and soldiers performing an advise and assist function on and about Erbil. This is the extent of Canada's mission, and all Canadians should be tremendously proud of the Canadian Armed Forces.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Let's be clear here, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives explicitly left the door open to bombing Syria, and the NDP explicitly opposed that. Now the government is considering expanding Canada's aerial strikes into Syria at Bashar al-Assad's behest. They've gone from Assad must go to we'll go with Assad's permission. Will the minister confirm that he's seeking Assad's permission for airstrikes in Syria?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the men and women of our armed forces are very focused on their current mission, and that is twofold. One, providing support and advise and assist on the ground around Erbil, and of course the air mission Mr. Speaker, we're also working on things like ensuring that we cut off the financing. We're also working on the humanitarian side. We also are working to ensure that there's an inclusive government with an inclusive program, and we're making good progress on all those.
Honourable Member for Hochelaga. 21% of our children are currently living in poverty. That is 1 out of 5 children. Aboriginal and immigrant children are even harder hit than others. We're talking about our future here. Tomorrow's leaders who cannot grow up in conditions that allow them to thrive. Will the government listen to the recommendations of UNICEF and reset its objectives to ensure that children are not the victims of their ill-advised budget choices? Honourable Minister of State.
We've taken real action when it comes to reducing poverty. In fact, the action that we have taken has been recognized by UNICEF. Mr. Speaker, UNICEF recognized that during the depths of the recession, we lifted 180,000 children out of poverty. And let me tell you what David Morley, President and CEO of UNICEF Canada, said. He said, Canada is faring better than other Western countries. It's due to measures that are favorable to families like tax credits, fiscal measures and benefits that have been maintained or put in place to counter the effects of the global crisis. Mr. Speaker, those are measures we put into place that are actually having an effect. We will not listen to the NDP. We will continue.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. I can't see how the Conservatives can boast about this. We are ranked 20th out of 41 countries considered as the richest in the world. 21% of our children live in poverty. And UNICEF has stated that for the most disadvantaged, conditions have gotten even worse. And that is under the Conservatives and the Liberals. Is the Minister telling us that these statistics are acceptable? The Honourable Minister of State.
What is unbelievable is the NDP. Here are the facts, Mr. Speaker. There are nearly 1.4 million fewer Canadians living in poverty under this government and this Prime Minister than under the Liberals and any other government. Mr. Speaker, our policies have lifted 225,000 children out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, I could go on with the evidence-based effects that our policies are having. They can keep asking questions. We'll keep delivering results for Canadian children.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Rouge River.
Mr. Speaker, I have another question. 1 in 5 Canadian children lives in poverty today, and this minister thinks that that's reason for self-congratulations. 25 years ago today, this House made a solemn commitment to Canada's children that they will not have to grow up in poverty. But 25 years later, here are the facts, Mr. Speaker. Child poverty levels have increased significantly from 13% in 1989 to 21% today. Instead of constantly giving tax breaks to the wealthy in this country who really don't need them, why won't this Conservative government introduce a real plan to eliminate child poverty?
The Honourable Minister of State for Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, is why won't the NDP support measures that actually lift children and families out of poverty? We're not saying this, Mr. Speaker. Organizations like UNICEF are saying it. And it's things like our universal child care benefit, which we introduced. They said was a slap in the face to Canadian families. What do they think of the universal child care benefit? They're going to take it away. Not only have we introduced it, we're going to increase it, we're going to expand it. We will look at the facts, we will depend on evidence, we will not listen to the NDP because we know all they want to do is create big bureaucracies and increase taxes on Canadian families.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Valley.
Speaker, Conservatives pat themselves on their back while more than 1 million children in Canada live in poverty. This is no time for self-congratulations from them. Food bank rates are at a record level, and nearly 4 out of 10 who attend food banks are children. The number of kids who wake up in homeless shelters is rising, not falling under Conservatives, and far, far too often First Nations children live in conditions that are on par with some of the poorest countries on the planet. To the Minister of Finance, 25 years after Ed Broadbent brought a motion into this House of Commons to end child poverty, will he dump his $3 billion income-splitting scheme and finally do something to end poverty in Canada?
And the Honourable Minister of State.
Here's what Canadian families know. They know that under our government, they have more money in their pockets. Mr. Speaker, since we took office, there are 225,000 fewer children in poverty. The average Canadian family has an additional $3,400 in their pocket. With our universal child care benefit increase and expansion, as well as our family tax cut, it will mean that it will be an average of $1,200 more in the pockets of Canadian families. We know what the NDP plan is, a $5 billion plan that will help less than 10% of Canadian families, will do nothing for rural families, will do nothing for families who are working part-time. So we will not listen to their ideology, we'll deliver results.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-L'Île. The Conservatives have really no respect for the work of federal public servants. Recently, believe it or not, they sent out a mass email asking that public servants retweet Conservative propaganda and their most recent election slogan. Isn't that partisan? Instead of trying to draw them into their electoral schemes, why don't the Conservatives allow public servants to do their work and to serve the Canadian public? The Honourable Minister. Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. We have reduced taxes for Canadian families by over $3,000 per year. That's the tax burden for all Canadian families. And with the reforms announced by the Prime Minister recently, the average Canadian family will benefit from $1,200 per year. 100% of Canadian families with children under 18 will benefit from these tax cuts and these new benefits for families. And we think Canadians are proud of that.
James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, this government are kings of false advertising, having blown over $100 million on partisan promotion. We now understand that they're telling civil servants to get on Twitter to act as cheerleaders for this Conservative dubious income-splitting scheme for the rich. Now, the fact is that civil servants are supposed to act in a nonpartisan fashion. So why won't the Conservatives leave our civil servants alone so they can do the job that Canadians hired them for? Border security, scientific research, helping seniors, rather than acting as Twitter trolls for the Conservative Party.
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure, of course, that Canadians are aware of the availability of the new expanded universal child care benefit for which they should apply. If they have children between the ages of 7 and 18, they can now receive a brand new benefit of $60 a month per child. That's over $1,900 and plus it's at $720 a year, in addition to which, for children newborns to the age of 6 can now receive a universal child care benefit in the order of $160 a month. That's $1,920 a year, Mr. Speaker. These are very significant benefits. We want to make sure Canadians are aware that they apply for these benefits.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, if you can't answer a question in Parliament, how the heck are they going to explain it on Twitter? We're talking about the misuse of the public service by the Conservative Party. This has not been approved by Parliament, and it will benefit only the super rich. Now, why doesn't this government just do what the civil servants should be doing? Leave them alone to do the job the Canadians are paying for, rather than having to act as pom-pom Twitter-addy for this government and this minister.
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the member demonstrates why he's not taken very seriously. He doesn't even bother to become even vaguely acquainted with the facts, which are that 2/3 of the beneficiaries of this package will be modest and low-income families, Mr. Speaker. He refers to the super rich. Does he think that single moms with a couple of kids who are living below the poverty line are super rich? Because, in fact, Mr. Speaker, 2 such children under the age of 6 would benefit to the amount of over $3,800, Mr. Speaker, which is, I'll tell you, for a single mom with 2 kids, it's an awful lot of money, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 95 people are living today with severe disability due to thalidomide. They need government support now. Our drug approval system failed these Canadians once. The health minister has a responsibility to do what is just and compassionate so they are able to live their lives with dignity, optimum functioning, and free from pain. Will the minister do the right thing?
The The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, this horrible event from the 60s reminds us of how seriously we need to take drug safety. We have now one of the safest drug systems in the world, and recently we strengthened it even further with the passage of Vanessa's Law. I'll tell the member that we're happy to review any policy proposals and add to conversations had earlier this year with Health Canada officials. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mount Royal.
Mr. Speaker, Justice Louis LaBelle is about to retire from the Supreme Court, but it appears that no appointment process has been put in place. No published protocol of consultation, no selection panel, no parliamentary review, no public engagement, no transparency, and no accountability. Yet in 2004, Conservative members of the Justice Committee, including the now Justice Minister himself, recommended, and I quote, there must be a public review of a short list of nominees before a parliamentary committee. Does the minister stand by his own recommendation for a public, parliamentary, accountable, transparent process?
Great question. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member would know full well that it was, in fact, our government that put in place the most inclusive, most consultative process that we've ever seen in the history of Canada when it comes to Supreme Court judges. And, Mr. Speaker, that, of course, was not the case when he held the office that I currently occupy, Mr. Speaker. So I can promise the honourable member we will be consulting broadly with prominent members of the Bar Association, the judiciary, of course the elected members of the Government of Quebec. And, Mr. Speaker, I note the honourable member is recently making plans to leave this place. We might even consider him.
The Honourable Member for The Honourable Member for Charlottetown.
Mr. Speaker, the recommendations made by the Minister of Justice in 2004 concerning appointments to the Supreme Court could have prevented the Marc-Nadon fiasco. Instead, this process was sabotaged by the Prime Minister's office, and now the recommendations of the Minister and parliamentary participation have been abandoned. Why this contradiction? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, that the opening hasn't actually occurred as yet, but Mr. Speaker, the member, I repeat, for the record, should know that we do, in fact, consult very broadly. We have, of course, taken the time to consult with the elected government of the province of Quebec. We are hearing from the judiciary. We are hearing from the members of the Bar, both the Canadian Bar Association, the Bar from Quebec, Mr. Speaker, retired judges, retired individuals who have much to offer. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the overriding criteria is legal excellence, merit, Mr. Speaker, and it is a decision for the executive branch of the government.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac.
The Liberal government was sued by the firm Envoy after realizing that the Integrated Public Service Relocation Program, which cost the government $300 million annually, was, yes, rigged. Now, 10 years later, the Conservative government paid $35 million to settle the lawsuit. But that wasn't made public, and it wasn't announced anywhere. Everything was kept secret until it had to be revealed, buried deep in the public accounts. Can the government tell us if this settlement means that there was serious wrongdoing?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, the government did indeed reach an agreed-upon settlement with the company following on the very failed procurement by the previous Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to ensuring that Canadians do receive value for their hard-earned tax dollars, and that's why we're reviewing the process again to make sure that any new contracts will meet those standards.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac.
10 ans après,
10 years after the Conservatives ending the Envoy's contract for relocation of officials, buried in the public accounts, we've learned that the cost of their incompetence is $35 million. $35 million to buy peace with the bidder who was cavalierly tossed aside by the Liberals. How does the government expect or explain that all of their tenders and wind up being disasters, and that at the end of the day it's Canadians who have to foot the bill? The Honourable Minister of Public Accounts. Mr. Speaker, it's the former Liberal government who signed the contract that was not properly done, and that's why the company turned to the courts. Mr. Speaker, this company is no longer providing these services, and we're going to assure that in the future contracts will be much better structured for taxpayers.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to neglect the people of Southern Ontario with a broken promise to invest in the region. Despite a commitment for $200 million over 5 years for the Advanced Manufacturing Fund, 18 months later, and not a dime has gone out the door. We've lost far too many good family-supporting jobs in Southern Ontario, while the Conservatives look the other way. So is the minister incapable or unwilling to get this money out the door?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, the application deadline for the first round of the Advanced Manufacturing Fund, which the member voted against, by the way, just passed last month. So the first recipients of this particular fund will be announced in the coming weeks. This fund is yet another example of our government helping employers in Ontario becoming more competitive on the global stage and creating jobs in Ontario.
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Well, no rush, Mr. Speaker. Forget about those Southern Ontario families that are suffering through the manufacturing crisis. Now, the Prime Minister was in London today, but still no news of money from the Advanced Manufacturing Fund. Since the Conservatives took office, London has lost 10,000 good manufacturing jobs. And since last year, they've been sitting on $200 million that was promised to create jobs and opportunities in Southern Ontario. Why is the minister shortchanging Canadian manufacturing?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, the member speaks of only one fund and conveniently forgets all the others. This particular fund that the member talks about, the Advanced Manufacturing Fund, is for large, transformative, large-scale, multi-year, multi-partnered investments. This fund's first round of money just closed last month, and I'm excited about some of the projects that are in that fund. The member conveniently forgets the $20 million we announced for manufacturing just last week. Mr. Speaker, this fund has lots of exciting projects. We'll be announcing them in the next few weeks.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley East.
Mr. Speaker, the Royal Canadian Navy is in the midst of its most intensive and comprehensive renewal in its peacetime history. This includes the Halifax-class frigate modernisation programme. This programme, which remains on schedule and on budget, represents an investment of $4.3 billion from our government. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence please update this House on the modernisation of our frigates and what it means to our armed forces? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is ensuring our sailors have the modern equipment they need to monitor and defend Canadian waters and to continue contributing to international naval operations. We're happy to announce that following recent sea trials, the HMCS Fredericton will deploy early next year as our first fully modernized frigate. The modernization program is giving our frigates new radar, a new electronic warfare system, upgraded communications technology, and new missiles. This successful program, made possible through investments from this government, will ensure the Royal Canadian Navy remains ready for years to come.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau.
When it comes to nominating judges, Conservative incompetence is going from a political embarrassment to a systemic problem. In Ontario alone, 31 vacancies for federally appointed judges. 23 of those are on the Superior Court. Our courts need judges to function. Cases are being delayed by more than 9 months. When will Conservative get on with the job and appoint the eligible judges our justice system needs?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I assure the Honourable Member we are doing just that. The Honourable Member would know that it is necessary to consult with the judiciary, consult with the elected government of the province affected by these vacancies, and consult with the bar associations. We take the time to ensure that we get the best candidates, those that meet the criteria of legal excellence, competence, and the type of judges that she knows and would support are going to serve Canadians in that role.
The
Honourable member for Gatineau.
Justice delayed is justice denied for everyone, especially victims. En Ontario, il y a 30.
In Ontario, there are 31 judicial vacancies, and some have stood vacant for over 18 months. The minister's inaction is hindering the work of all of the courts. The Superior Court, the Court of Appeal, and not to forget the Supreme Court of Canada. Victims are waiting for justice to be done, and they're the first victims of the minister's inaction. When will they get to work and appoint judges in order to reduce wait times? It's urgent. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, access to justice is, of course, a concern for all, but it is more than just the appointment of judges that will lead to a more functioning process. But with respect to these appointments, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate, for the member for this House, we continue to consult broadly to ensure that we're getting the absolute best candidates, best people representing us on the courts, Mr. Speaker, individuals who meet the criteria, and the issue of competence and legal excellence and merit are the overriding concerns, and we will have some appointments coming very soon, I assure the honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, on the show Tout le monde en parle, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois invited Quebecers to follow his example and contribute to a fund to support a citizens movement which is campaigning against TransCanada's pipeline project. Since last night, over $165,000 has been collected. This demonstrates that Quebecers are concerned, and also that they have the impression of not being heard by this government, which has distorted the environmental assessment process. When will the Conservatives admit that they are responsible for this fiasco? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We do not take positions on specific applications for energy infrastructure until an independent review is complete. Our government relies on the Independent National Energy Board for decisions related to proposals of energy infrastructure, including TransCanada's Energy East proposal. We look forward to receiving the result of their rigorous, thorough, and independent review. Our government has been clear. Proposals will not be approved unless they are safe for Canadians and safe for the environment.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Under the Conservatives, there are no more credible mechanisms to assess the social acceptability of projects. The environmental assessment process for pipelines is completely discredited. By declaring that social acceptability is only an ideological concept, the Minister of Natural Resources proves that he cares little of people's opinions. Rather than trying to adopt this project at any cost, why does the minister not listen to people and let them have their say? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The government has been clear that projects will only proceed if they are safe for Canadians and safe for the environment. The National Energy Board is responsible to hear from those who may be directly affected by this project and those who have expertise on the matter. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sydney, Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, more than 140,000 Canadians employed in the fresh fruit and vegetable sector have been let down by this government. Their failed Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act is jeopardizing billions in produce sales. The Minister is minimizing this devastation that it has on small growers. Mr. Speaker, 75% of the produce industry is small business. It's risky grown produce and margins are tight. Will this Minister act now so the produce industry can be protected?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Our government understands the importance of Canada's fresh produce industry and its contribution to our economy. That is why we introduced clear legislation to provide a single dispute resolution body that would help reduce issues of non-payment faced by the fresh produce industry. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we are consulting widely on Canada's bankruptcy and insolvency laws, and these will come in front of Parliament in the near future. Our government is committed to supporting Canadian producers and exporters, and we will continue to work on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Malpeque.
Trouble is, Mr. Speaker, that proposal just will not work, and the industry has told that to the government. The fact, Mr. Speaker, are that Canadian fruit and vegetable sellers have had long-standing protection under United States law. They no longer have that protection as of October 1. As a result, Canadian jobs, Canadian farmers, and parts of our supply chain are at serious risk. As the industry has made it clear, they need a Canadian-made Perishable Commodities Act, and that is the only option to protect produced suppliers. Why not implement that viable option?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I met with the industry just last week, and certainly when the Fresh Safe Food for Canadians Act was in front of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, one of the top requests of this sector of agriculture was that there be put in place legislation to highlight a single dispute resolution body. Mr. Speaker, that was done. That came in front of Parliament, and it was passed. Now, with respect to other solutions, Mr. Speaker, there are other possible solutions, and these were discussed at the meeting that I had with industry representatives just last week. Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby Douglas.
Mr. Speaker, in the past week, over 50 people have been arrested for protesting Kinder Morgan's test drilling on Burnaby Mountain, and this includes the arrest this weekend of two 11-year-old girls. These are not radicals, Mr. Speaker. They are regular people who rightly feel shut out of the flawed process to review this pipeline, and they have no faith in the environmental review process gutted by these Conservatives. So why has this government deliberately set up a process that's primed for this kind of conflict? And let's not pretend the NEB process is any more than a sham.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We respect the right of Canadians to peaceful protest. However, the rule of law must be followed. This project will undergo a rigorous science and fact-based review by the National Energy Board. The board must hear from those who are directly affected by a proposed project and may choose to hear from those with relevant expertise on the project. Again, Mr. Speaker, we have been clear. Projects will only proceed if they are safe for Canadians and safe for the environment.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Well, their process involves arresting people. It actually should involve consulting people and consulting Canadians, Mr. Speaker, because this is about getting development right, not doing it at any cost. Conservatives don't seem to believe in social license. They think it's an ideological term. But tell that to the folks that are on Burnaby Mountain right now, Mr. Speaker. With no real credible evaluation process, arresting people is not going to give projects like Kinder Morgan's social license. So why has this government so thoroughly and completely broken trust with the public on energy project reviews?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the National Energy Board is a robust, independent regulatory body that conducts a rigorous science and fact-based review of projects. As I've said, the board must hear from those who are directly affected by a proposed project and may choose to hear from those who have relevant expertise on the matter. Again, Mr. Speaker, we have been clear. These projects will not proceed if they are safe for Canadians and safe for the environment.
The Honourable Member for Prince Edward Hastings.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians were shocked by the horrific terrorist attacks of late October. As a result of extreme actions by ISIL, Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent and Corporal Nathan Swillow lost their lives. Often in the past, we've had a tendency to underreact to these very real threats against us. My constituents want to see this Conservative government take strong action to protect them from violent terrorists. To the Minister of Public Safety, please upgrade and update this House on what the government is doing in this regard.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Prince Edward Hastings. He's the chair of the Public Safety Committee, Mr. Speaker. He has an important role. This very afternoon, I will appear in front of the committee to invite this member to support the protection of a Canada Terrorist Act. Mr. Speaker, we are removing passport to those terrorists. We are ready to take out dual citizenship when they are convicted of terrorist act. Why is the position opposing? It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, but one thing we are sure, we will move forward with surveillance, arrestation and detention, additional measures, Mr. Speaker, so we keep Canadians safe.
And the Honourable Member for Etobicoke North.
In 2009, the Prime Minister attended the Copenhagen Conference and committed Canada to reducing carbon pollution to 17% below 2005 levels. However, the Environment Commissioner says Canada is on track to miss
its Copenhagen targets. Next week, leaders from around the world will convene in Peru to begin negotiations on a new climate agreement. Before the summit begins, a simple question to the Environment Minister. Will Canada achieve its Copenhagen commitment?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have always been very clear for any international agreement to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions that all major emitters and economies do their part. With the U.S. and China accounting for 39% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, we are very encouraged by the promises they have made to reduce their emissions, as Canada only emits less than 2%. In 2012, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions were roughly 5% lower than 2005 levels, while the economy grew by 10%. We will continue to play our part by reducing emissions at home and work with our partners across the globe to establish an international agreement that includes all.
The Honourable Member for Halifax.
Halifax's Leave Out Violence, or LOVE program, does incredible work by helping extremely at-risk youth find and keep jobs in our community. There are glowing reports of its success, and everyone at the department recommended a renewal of LOVE's funding. But the minister denied their funding. How are you supposed to play by the rules when the minister changes the rules at whim, casts aside evidence, and ignores everyone's advice? Why is he denying funding to LOVE, a program with proven success at helping at-risk youth?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Because, very simply, Mr. Speaker, the proposed grant would have cost approximately $45,000 tax dollars for every job created. I know that to the NDP, there's no limit in the large S with which they would have government spend tax dollars. We are committed to creating jobs and assisting youth at risk, which is why we invest enormously in skills development in that area. But, Mr. Speaker, there has to be a practical limit. And I would submit, I know the NDP would be happy to spend $80,000 or $120,000, but we think $45,000 tax dollars for one job created is unreasonable and unjustifiable, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, according to reports from the Associated Press, ISIL is actively conscripting children for battle at a young age. A United Nations panel has reported that ISIL prioritizes children as a vehicle for ensuring long-term loyalty, adherence to their ideology, and a cadre of devoted fighters that will see violence as a way of life. These are incredibly disturbing reports, Mr. Speaker. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence please update the House on Operation Impact and Canada's ongoing contribution to the fight against ISIL?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Kildonan St. Paul for her work in ending human trafficking and child warriors. Mr. Speaker, these are indeed horrific and disturbing reports, and is just further proof that ISIL is a barbaric, murderous organization, that the fact is they have to be stopped. I can confirm that aircraft from the Royal Canadian Air Force have now conducted 109 sorties last week in a pre-planned mission. 2 CF-18 fighter jets successfully struck ISIL fighting positions in the desert area near Kirkuk. This has significantly assisted Iraqi security forces who are fighting ISIL on the ground in the region. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, Canada will do its part in this fight against tyranny, oppression.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. While toxic dust continues to fall in Limoilou and on the Bay of Beauport, the government is stubbornly allowing businesses set up within the ports to continue to circumvent provincial regulations on the environment. The people of Quebec are very concerned, and Ms. Véronique Lalande from the Citizens Initiative to oversee activities in the Port of Quebec is in Ottawa today to criticize these provisions. Will the minister change their position and ensure that federal regulations are respected?
Mr. Speaker, the member will know that the Port of Quebec obviously is an arm's-length organization and as such responsible for its own operational decisions. What I can confirm for the member, of course, is that the Port of Quebec has been working with a number of tenants over the last number of months in order to implement important measures in order to reduce the contamination of dust emissions, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Barry-Richelieu Nicolas Bécancourt. Mr. Speaker, with its cuts, the federal government's forcing CBC Radio-Canada to take unfortunate decisions. We believed, however, that the government would leave the network its freedom of creation and programming, but the former Minister of Heritage personally intervened to obtain higher visibility for the monarchy and for Canadian nation building, as well as preventing the hiring of the former leader of the Bloc Québécois. Will the Prime Minister set up an independent inquiry in order to ensure that the journalistic independence of the CBC is protected and that there's a clear separation between the newsroom and political power? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Appointments come after rigorous and transparent and merit-based selection process. Our goal is to appoint candidates who are the most competent for each one of those positions. Our government does not interfere with the democratic process and democratic rights of board members to vote or donate to any other parties. Mr. Speaker, I'll say it again, the CBC acts independently.
Honourable Member for Huntsic. Mr. Speaker, a citizen consultation and of social stakeholders in Huntsic is demanding with reason that 1,000 affordable housing units be built within 10 years. Many units are already threatened by the end of the agreement with the federal government. By 2016, 100,000 units in Canada will lose their financial support, including many in Huntsic. Does the government understand that they have to reconsider its decision and renew these agreements? The Honourable Minister of State.
Housing agreements have been coming to an end over the last many years and will continue to come to an end over the next 20 years because the mortgages are paid off. What we have done, though, in order to help these housing units is we've extended our investment in affordable housing with the provinces. They are free once these agreements come to an end to continue support. We've also created some flexibilities for co-ops, and I want to tell you what Nicholas Gerard of the Cooperative Housing Federation said of our flexibilities. He said, this additional flexibility allows co-ops to use federal funding to provide rent-geared-to-income assistance for vulnerable, low-income households, even after their funding agreements have expired.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel. Mr. Speaker, Canada's intellectual property agreement has been discussed in European territory. In the recent free trade agreement, the government gave Europe 119 extra geographic indicators, and we obtain no extra protection for our products. Is there a reason why this government refuses to protect Canadian products on the global scale? The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I reject the premise of that question. Like in any other trade negotiation, our trade negotiations with the European Union represented an outcome that represents a Canadian balance. We're very pleased with that balance. I would remind the member that this is the most comprehensive trade agreement that Canada has ever signed. It's going to add 80,000 new jobs to our economy. It's going to add $12 billion of additional economic activity to our economy. Mr. Speaker, this is an excellent outcome for Canadians, and I hope he'll support it when he has a chance to vote for it in this House.
That concludes question period for today. I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of Senator Marcela Guerra Castillo, the head of a delegation of representatives from the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies of the United Mexican States participating in the 20th Canada-Mexico Interparliamentary Meeting. Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministres.
Statements by ministers.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. The honourable member for Burlington.
Speaker, and I know you shared thoughts with the great job the Seahawks did this past weekend, but
Mr. Speaker, I'm here. It's my honor to present in both official language the 8th report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights in relation to the study on proposals for a Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Act 2014.
Presenting reports from committees. The honourable member for Huron-Bruce.